realized I've been on mute this whole time. Fancy seeing everyone here. I think we couple familiar faces from 2 minutes ago. Is John with us?
Sure he will.
Yeah, I just looking at the agenda, he's the only thing on it. So I'm thinking maybe we can start with the thing that we didn't get to from the last meeting, John, if you want to. You've got the only agenda item here, John. So if you want to talk about that Helm Istio Cuddle install change as well, I think that'd be appropriate.
You're muted, John.
Good mic. Okay, there we go. Yeah, just wanted to give a quick update on some of the feedback we've gotten from Ambient. In case people haven't been following along on GitHub issues, discussions in 10 different Slack channels. So since the beta, we have had like a 100x increase in user feedback and whatnot. So I think it's safe to say that people were definitely waiting for that announcement and are now kind of the floodgates have opened. I've got a lot of good feedback, I think, in terms of like UX and high level things and in terms of like bugs and whatnot. A lot of bugs we found were the type of thing that is kind of what you would want to find in a beta, which is like, hey, I ran in this obscure environment and things didn't work. Like this Raspberry Pi with like a custom kernel that's configured weirdly or something, which is good. Like we fixed a ton of stuff, made a lot of improvements. We've also seen some people struggle a lot, and then after all of that say, wow, this is so good that I don't actually care that I just spent all this time digging into these bugs with you because it's worth it, which is a good sign because hopefully the next generation of users won't have to go through all that pain and they'll just get the outcome. One of the biggest issues I think actually is that we fixed all these bugs, but 1.22.1 is like almost a month old at this point, so it doesn't have those fixes. So the next release, 122.2, is coming out in like the next day or two. So I think that would be a big relief valve kind of for all those people hitting the same bugs that we've already fixed. In terms of the higher level stuff, there's been a few. The main kind of trend I've seen is that people just don't really understand kind of like, I want to get this behavior. What do I need to configure? Do I need to configure the waypoint? Do I need to configure ztunnel? Can ztunnel do this? Or do I need a waypoint? Is this the ingress? Like just kind of the interaction of things and like how to configure things. So that's an area that we can improve on from documentation and whatnot, probably. That's kind of high level. I'm sure others, I mean, if other people want to chime in, feel free to. But overall, I think it's been a good last month for Ambient, I think.
John, I remember like a year ago, we talked about having some sort of maybe even status feedback when your config was not being actuated because you don't have a waypoint to actuate it. I know I didn't build that. Did we overall? I kind of lost the thread there.
No, status is still high on the to-do list.
Okay.
So, but it's also like, yeah, we haven't really done that. So.
Does it seem like that would be helpful in most cases where users have been confused about whether they needed a waypoint?
Maybe. I think a lot of the time it was just like they just didn't even know where to start of like what config do I even want and where should I go to give me the behavior I want. Okay. But for some cases, yes.
So there were two things that I've noticed. John, if you're done. One, the commingling of docs, right, for sidecars and ambient, right, is probably contributing to that problem John just described, which is I want to figure out how to do a thing. I know the APIs that let me do that thing. How do I do that thing? Because the docs are commingled, sometimes people try to do it the sidecar way, or are unsure if when they do it that they're doing it the ambient way. And that's definitely, we had one user ask for just a completely different doc site that was ambient only because of this. The other thing I would say is we've had almost no feedback about performance, which I take as a positive, that nobody's really experienced a performance issue or noticed one, which was definitely not the case when we launched sidecars. Or even when people adopted sidecars after many, many releases of Istio.
I will say I did get some feedback from someone that said their throughput was worse compared to sidecars. I wasn't really convinced that their workload really resembled iPerf in a meaningful way and that it would really impact them. But we did fix it, so now we are matching Envoy on the master branch.
Right. Like
yeah.
there are performance issues. Like
yeah.
we know there are performance issues. It's just that not a lot of users have complained about them.
Yes, that is true.
Which is a good thing. And some of these are net new adopters, right? Like they were not Istio users before, and now they are adopting.
Louis, do you know, in terms of performance issues, are we talking about latency? Are we talking about resource utilization, or
all of the above?
Okay.
Like hopefully people saw John's recent fix, right? Just optimizing throughput, right, in zTunnel, right, which took, John, what were the numbers before and after?
It's like 9 gigabits per second to 13 or so on my machine.
Right, which in the world of performance optimization, right, in networking, that's an enormous improvement.
Yeah, for what it's worth, WireGuard is like 2. So.
Yeah, and I don't remember off the top of my head what IPsec is, but probably pretty close to that number, right? Because they're almost the same protocol. So like with one PR, we're fixing a throughput issue of that magnitude. You can guarantee that there are others. Like we know there are CPU utilization issues in Envoy. Like there's just. But that hasn't blocked anybody really. It's always no delay or DNS key. At least until you get past those problems systemically. We also haven't had a scale problem, I suppose. Really? Right, where like the site, like people needing to use the sidecar resource because their Envoy config was blowing up, right? Because they installed it in one namespace in a cluster, but the cluster was massive, right? A pretty common issue that we used to see. I don't have that problem. Anybody else have any anecdata they'd like to share? How about vendor feedback? Right. Presumably some vendors out there are trying to productionize. Well, I work for one that's productionizing Ambient, or trying to get it ready for production to sell a product based on it. How has that affected your build, test, release, productization cycles?
By that, you mean the beta or just the release of Ambient in general?
Yeah, let's say the beta. Or just Ambient in general, right? And your ability to productize it. Is it making it easier?
I'll say from my side, I've been able to have more conversations around potentially adopting Ambient as a product now that it's in beta rather than before. So just having that label and having production ready attached to it is helpful. There's one of the, I will say, one of the things that has continued to come up is the desire for a thorough security review. Obviously, we'll have our people do that, but I think that with the shared node model, that might be something the community might be interested in, especially breaking down like what makes Ambient more secure. I think that Solo's done a couple of talks on it. I think Christian had one a while back, but kind of really breaking down the trust model and talking about why the identity models and the cert provisioning specifically might be has been something that we've been discussing.
Yeah, can I dig into that a bit? Like, is this like we want a formal audit by some third party, or we want to document that threat model? Like, I have a not yet opened prototype PR of like Istio's threat model that tries to kind of describe some of this. It's a lot harder than I expected to write, so it's not, hasn't made that much progress. But like, is that the type of thing you're looking for, or something else?
I think that would be helpful. A full-fledged third-party audit is not necessary. It's more about convincing stakeholders that this is not going to result in confused deputy impersonation type of things. And whenever you talk about a node proxy, rightly so, any sort of delegated identity, that's going to be a concern. So a workup of the threat model in any form would be a great place to start discussion. I've been kind of working. I've got my own mental model, but if the project has something, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It sounds like maybe a good first place to start would be to actually go like write up that and like where what are all the threats and how do we address them and how do we behave. And then like it would be great. Like I personally don't like third-party auditors because I don't think they actually do useful things usually. So I get that some people like the checkbox, and I don't mind if someone pays for that and we do it. But if like someone wanted to go from the Microsoft security team or something, wanted to go over the threat model doc and like go in detail, that has a lot of expertise, I'd be happy to do that. And I think that'd be valuable, both for the community and for obviously defenders that have these security requirements and concerns. And if someone wants to collaborate on a threat model doc or take my absolute garbage writing and turn it into something useful, that would be awesome as well. It'd be useful for sidecars as well, to be honest. But
I was going to say, I think it might be. I've been having conversations as we speak with one of our security folks about the trust domain model for sidecars and how identities work. And Ambient's plan to is planned in the future. So I'd be happy to collaborate with you on said doc. And I'm happy to take a draft and polish it up. And I'll reach out to the security person I'm talking to about going through that doc in detail and looking for a lot of the common vulnerabilities and attack vectors.
Jeremy, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I had a conversation internally at Microsoft that was around like the stability and like scalability concerns with Ambient. Nothing really specific, but generally they just want to make sure that it can scale up to be like how Sidecar Istio is. And I noticed that I'll share the link in case someone doesn't have it available to them. But the 1.23 planning doc that I think he started, it's like the 5th bullet point down in tech that pay down. There's one like little phrase about updating stability test. That is something I think I want to just look into a little bit more, get more information about. I think if I could, share the story about how we're testing stability for Ambient with the PM on this side, that could help with assurances as well, or beat them up if we need to do that. I'd be willing to contribute to that as well. I think, just looking more into that could help ease people's concerns.
just to clarify, have they run into actual issues with stability or scalability? or they
No.
just want to make sure that they don't? Okay.
Yeah, it's just to make sure. Basically, like my response to that was like, do we have any specific like scenarios? Kind of like along the lines of, we wanted to pass the existing scenarios that we have for the sidecar SDO, and then maybe add some more. But yeah, kind of just making sure that we're up to par with what they expect. But yeah, like Keith said, people are definitely a fan of ambient. Just dotting I's and crossing T's kind of thing.
Yeah, that last sentiment was exactly what I was going to say. I think that the general feedback, honestly, for me, both internally and externally, for risk-conscious organizations looking to adopt ambient, whether as a vendor or as a consumer, is mainly to see the full, to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, make sure this thing can really stand up to production, high-frequency traffic. And any documentation, especially now that it's in beta, like case studies, like people want to see stability because it's been so new. And so that threat model doc would help. Even some of having like a workup of the perf tests that folks in the community have been doing. And I've seen several. I don't know if they're being captured in our Istio perf documentation on Istio.io. I don't think so, but I might be wrong. I may have not checked in a little while. But just having those things to point people to might, I think, help with adoption there.
John, did you have a response there?
It wasn't actually that. It was to Keith's original point a long time ago about beta. I want to just clarify. I have all these questions because I think it's useful information, by the way. So getting to beta was a big step. Is getting to stable something that is important from your perspective?
I think of more interest to us than the stable label is the stable burn down list. So things like multi-cluster testing and documentation, a few more configuration parameters for how pods opt into being captured by the Z-tunnel, things along those lines are going to be of interest. And I think we're going to be in a position to drive a lot of that in the community.
Yeah, one. I think another way for me of saying that is, I think from a community perspective, the stable label has a lot of, for lack of a better term, baggage, because of just how many things Istio supports. So I think that stable burn down list, I mean, reasonable minds can disagree, but I think, things like multi-cluster might not be as important as something like sidecar interop, or status on authorization policy, those sorts of things. Like stable and high quality user experience for single cluster is potentially more valuable than even a beta of multi-cluster at this point. It just kind of depends on what the effort is for each of the individual things.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. The reason I ask is we've had some people say like, "Oh, when's it going to be stable?" Like, beta now, stable next release. I'm going to wait till it's stable. So I don't know. I've been, I've also been like looking at the feature status. If you look at the stuff we have, like it's ridiculous. Like we say upgrades or beta, for example, in sidecars. I mean. For example, like everyone that's in production is upgrading. So everyone in production is using beta features. So there's obviously like a huge mismatch of reality versus labels and whatnot. So it's something we'll, not in the short term, but we'll need to figure out like what is stable for ambient, like what is the criteria for getting there, and how do we reconcile that with the rest of the world and whatnot. So.
Is this related to the work that Whitney has done in the past?
Yeah, definitely related. Yeah. I mean, part of the work is actually stabilizing ambient. Like it's not just a, labeling and organization issue. There's definitely work to make ambient stable. It's just kind of also a question of what is that work exactly? Like where's the cutoff and how do we convey that to users?
Yeah, it sounds like partly like a marketing effort in a way. Like obviously we're going to be doing the work behind the scenes to make it stable, but it's also just conveying that stability to users.
It goes both ways. I mean, there are a lot of things that we claim to be beta that are quite stable, and there are a lot of things that we claim to be stable or beta that are barely tested and used. So we need to be very careful of not claiming that everything that has some documentation it's equal. Hence,
This is going a little bit deeper into that, but I was looking through a doc that John shared about our current feature status page, and what I see that I think we need to be conscious of for Ambient is that there is a tension between not breaking things down 50 different ways so that users can't look at the status page and get a reasonable idea of whether or not they can use a feature from like a public marketing side. There's tension between that and the tension between being accurate. Because as community members, as contributors, we know that there's a difference between API stability versus stability of the Istio part of the code versus stability of the underlying proxy implementation. And in the Envoy case, we don't have control over some of those things. And there's also a lot of choice that we have in how we break down things that are features. Is upgrade a feature or just something that needs to be, at a certain level for the system to work? To John's point, everybody's using it. Something like locality load balancing, sure, yeah, that's a feature, but is the API that we use to front it stable? Whereas Wasm plugin API hasn't changed a ton, but the underlying implementation in Envoy and the actual data plane implementation in Envoy is experimental. So it's like, so the way these things interact is very complex, and we could choose to surface that to a user, but we don't want to have them reference 4 or 5 different charts just to, like, by charts, I mean literal tables on a web page to figure out whether a thing is stable or not. So it's this really nuanced dance of being able to pull out enough value to a user in a way that's also accurate, to Costin's point.
Coming back to the original point I think John raised, which is the imperative to get to stable, whatever we define it to be, right? Understanding that stable is a marketing definition for a broad bucket of things, right, to change user perception. We are not going hell for leather trying to make 123 stable. Right? That is not an immediate marketing goal, a perceptual goal. I'll leave marketing to steering. But would it be the goal for the following release? Like at some point, we're going to have to explicitly state it as a goal. And we get to pick V next as that point in time. When, like obviously the burn down list in the doc is pretty substantial. The code freeze for the next release is in 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks. We spent a lot of time addressing very direct user feedback, right, and user reported issues, which is the right use of time. So does anybody think we're getting to any definition of stable in vNext?
Next being 123.
Right. That's kind of what I thought too.
For me, it's almost less, will we be at stable by 123 and more of, do we have enough feedback and enough soak time in the community to feel confident in calling it stable?
For at least a known set of features.
Yeah, I think in 123 we will get a decent sized production usage of, at the very least, vTunnel without major issues. But I don't think we'll call Ambient stable at that point.
Okay. What about for V next? Right, at some point we'll have to make it a goal. Right, that's the way. You don't get things done unless you actually assert the goal. How do people feel about? I think it's the November release.
Yeah,
right?
November.
I'll say from a Microsoft side, we're engaged in planning right now, so it's a little bit unclear what resources are going to be. There's a potential for a good number of resources to be committed to moving this forward and to working through that burn down. There's also the potential for it to be not quite so substantial. So I would have a lot more confidence once that planning is complete.
It's just, putting marketing hat back on, right? The next is also designed to align with KubeCon North America.
Yeah.
Which is a good marketing opportunity.
My gut tells me VNext +2 or like VNext for stability, which I think would coincide with released right before KubeCon EU. And I'm not super married to that, but the rationale for that is that we just hit beta in 122. You get about 3 months of people trying it out, adopting it, etc. And what for between 122 and 123, that's 3 months. 123 to 124 is where I suspect if there are deep assumptions that we've made that we haven't caught yet, if there are core incompatibilities, if there are like scaling concerns that people are running into as they're rolling it out, I predict that's where we're going to see it. 123 releases in what, a month or two? August, yeah. So for me, it's more of a matter of how quickly do organizations adopt technology, and we're going to have a floor. Yeah, I think that's the right direction. That we're going to have a floor of no, that's not true. We're going to have this minimum bake time to be able to let the beta sit and sweat for a bit before we're going to really get the useful information, in my opinion. And so just kind of working backwards, I land around like 125 as the date to aim for stable. But I'm aware that feels a bit long, but just kind of working backwards is what I come up with.
Yeah, I'm not far off. I think if we chose not to do the split of L7 and L4 for beta. If we were to bring that back on the table for stable, then things could change substantially. The thing that's a bit unclear as well is like right now we got a ton of feedback and it's not clear if, we just resolved like all these issues and now it's going to drop off heavily and things are going to be smooth sailing, or if we're just getting started and we're going to have more and more issues. Like we don't see the curve yet. I think it's the first one, but I have no real evidence for that. So we'll have to see. Like if we got some big user in production at large scale as well, that would give us a ton of confidence. Hopefully that's not a chicken and egg problem, which we had for alpha. I don't think it will be. But if someone runs this at 50,000 pod scale in production for 3 months, then that is stable, at least in their environment, right?
So go ahead, Louis.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree, Keith, there's a kind of natural life cycle feedback loop here with usage at scale, like a large customer or large user using it in production and then going through at least one upgrade, right? And maybe a couple of patch releases is probably going to be the feedback that we need to call something stable, right? Or a few of those. And that obviously is dictated by enterprise adoption lifecycle timelines. So I agree with that. I would hope it happens a little more quickly, but you might be right that it might be 125.
In particular, I think there's a lot of unknowns around Z-tunnel upgrade. We've made several bets there. We've made a bet that an in-place upgrade is not an unacceptable disruption to traffic for a live cluster. We've made a bet that the code base is both secure enough because of its relatively small size and language safety, as well as, I guess, unchurny enough. It's stable enough in terms of lack of change in the code base that customers should feel safe running it in production for long periods of time with relatively infrequent need to do those live upgrades. I'd like to see how those bets pan out and whether we need to adjust before we want to call that layer stable. John?
Oh yeah, this may be going too far off topic, but to your point of the upgrades, I did do some recent debugging and testing and fixing. And the state as is pretty good, but with some other fixes, the state's actually quite good, I think, and better than I thought. And I've added a test into Istio. It's not merged yet, but that does a continuously send traffic and restart the server and continuously send traffic and restart zTunnel. We're restart in the test is not an upgrade, but it could be an upgrade, right? It's the same thing. And it has 0 downtime. Obviously, these are short-ish lived HTTP connections. So for long-lived connections, it's clear that it's not going to change that those are terminated. But that gives me some more confidence in that for a lot of users, that upgrade method will be viable. So.
Nice, that's fantastic.
So, John, you mean there is 0 traffic loss when you restart zTunnel?
So as long as, so there's a drain period, which we have it set to 5 seconds. I'm going to send a PR later to make it longer. As long as your connections are shorter than the drain period, then there's no traffic loss. If you have long-lived connections, those are going to be closed. So depending on how your application handles that, you may or may not have downtime or receive downtime. Like if we terminate the middle of a SQL transaction, then you're probably not super happy. You might retry it, but you're at least not unhappy or super happy. Something like Fortio, for example, it does use long-lived connections, but it completely gracefully handles reconnection without issue, and it doesn't even log anything or you notice it. If you have like a Python app that's not pooling at all, it shouldn't notice anything at all because we do kind of a graceful handoff with reuse port from the old zTunnel to the new zTunnel.
So we discovered the holy grail where we don't need drain period and all the lame duck is useless because we do some magic or something changed fundamentally. And
no, so the only thing, the thing that we have is that any new connection at any point in time will always succeed. There's no period of time where new connections will fail. Then we have a period of time where existing connections have to close. If those don't close, we're going to forcefully close them. We haven't solved that problem.
Those are 503s. Those are the 503s, yes.
Yeah, if you have long-lived connections and they're terminated, yes. If you don't have long-lived connections, then they're not. So
they don't have to be long-lived. I mean, because there is no draining. I mean, if I send a connection that lasts 1 second just before the tunnel is
no,
down,
that's the thing. There is a draining period. So as long as your connection length is shorter than the drain period, then it's fine. There's no downtime at all. So in the 5
seconds. So in the 5 seconds, the connection will go to a new zTunnel, or what will happen with the connection? If I initiate a new connection?
So let's say we have a request that takes 3 seconds. I start the request and immediately after zTunnel restarts. And then I send another request. So the first request, it's going to be handled by the original zTunnel because it was already open there. There's only one zTunnel, right? That zTunnel is going to let that connection complete for up to the drain period, which is 5 seconds. I think that's too short, but it doesn't matter. That connection, 3 seconds later, it will finish. The app will close the connection. Everything's fine. Now, the new request that happened right after the new zTunnel was started is going to go to the new zTunnel. So zTunnel is doing reuse port. So there's a tiny 1 millisecond time where both are open, in which the request could go to either the old one or the new one based on Linux. I think it does like random, or I don't know exactly how it picks it. But immediately after the new one comes up, the old one should close it should stop accepting new connections, so it'll just finish the old ones. I think you would call that lame duck probably.
So if we leave the drain period to 1 day, would be fine?
If you leave the drain period to 1 day, then you'd be fine as long as your connections are less than 1 day. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
To be honest, I don't know how much Kubernetes will like having a pod terminating for 1 day. I haven't tried that high.
Well, let's see what is the highest we can get. I mean, it's
5 seconds is
maximum.
5 seconds is too low for sure. I don't know if a day works, but something in between 5 and a day ought to be right.
Maximum that Kubernetes allows sounds reasonable. Okay.
Yeah.
So this might be an odd question, but there are some large cloud vendors here who have VPC flow logs information available to them. And you could probably look up and group by percentile the average connection time. Right, in like on your cloud, frankly, and know the distribution. Right, if we had access to that information, we could actually make prospective statements about the probability of traffic disruption in like globally, if we had some of that information.
I can tell you 1 hour is quite common for long live for poll and SQL and
Sure.
other things. It's very common. 1 day is probably at the margin of it's
Yeah,
perfectly fine. Rarely, yeah.
Like there are like edge load balancers to the public internet tend to try and more aggressively terminate long-lived connections around the hour boundary. Like that was certainly true for things like XMPP, chat, streaming, right, just to improve load balancing dynamics to backends, right, when they had high strong session affinity. The outliers, it's a different set inside the data center, right, where you're like long-lived connections to databases and things like that, that could in theory last days. But if we knew, you know, Postgres, like the typical Postgres client library keeps connection open for X, MySQL Y, right? Like if we had that type of information, then, right, we could make some pretty good heuristic recommendations about how long this grace period, this drain period should be, and yield a result that would probably satisfy almost everybody's SLOs.
We can make it customizable. I did actually did this kind of survey for a bunch of billion of Android devices, and I think the average was, you know, kind of around 2 hours. But there were some that were able to keep connection open for more than 24 hours. I think 3 or 4 days. Even I think 6 days was kind of the max I saw. But that was long ago. But anyway, it's not. I mean, it's not how much it can, because most of them can retry. Even if you terminate a PostgreSQL connection, it will retry. So it's not just, if we can make it customizable and determine the maximum of Kubernetes support, I think it will be perfectly fine. I'm surprised that it's working so well.
I was a bit surprised as well. I wrote the test and was like, oh, it passed. So that's but a good surprise. Yeah, I was thinking we would make it customizable and basically just have one setting which both controls the termination period, and also zTunnel can read from that to know on its own how long to go for. So, and the only reason for that is because it's slightly cleaner for zTunnel to shut down itself than to get sig killed from Kubernetes, so that it can gracefully close the TLS connection, for example, and HTTP2 connection, rather than just dying.
So, John, one more question. Does it rely on the fact that CNI is dynamically changing the redirection to go to the next one, to the new one? Or
No, the redirection logic doesn't change. It's all based on reuse port.
on the listener?
So,
Okay. Gotcha.
You know,
Awesome.
they go from one socket to 2 sockets back to 1 socket, and the 2 sockets is like minuscule amount of time. So
I see. That's actually awesome.
Yeah, I mean, this is a shockingly good result, frankly.
By the way, on the topic of stability and you know what we are seeing, people, at least in my experience so far, a lot of people are interested in keep using the sidecars for some stuff. So I think there is a lot of value to make it possible to kind of better interoperate and perhaps explore the sandwich for sidecars as well. I am planning to do some experiment, to do some code, because I'm not sure what is the status with the waypoint sandwich, but my personal, what I've seen from the people who want to use sidecar, I think they will be perfectly fine to use a combination of Ambient for L4 and sidecar, but there are a lot of people who want to do the load balancing from the client because of the performance reasons. They're not quite gRPC, but they still want the load balancing and all the decisions to be made on the client.
They want L7 load balancing client side.
Of course. Oh yeah, L7. Yeah, I mean, 90% of the internet traffic is L7 those days.
And not just client side, but actually within the control of the application.
No. Client side means sidecar. I mean, what sidecars do is basically do the L7 load balancing and L7, that rules the policies that apply without having to go through a hop. Which is perfectly fine. I mean, it's perfectly fine to use Ambient for L4 and do also, have a simplified and L4 policies applied at L4. And we are very close to that because it will simplify greatly the sidecar operations instead of doing so.
I'm just on that front, Custom. Like it's worthwhile educating people that right now, the L7 processing costs in Envoy outweigh the additional network hop to the waypoint. So it's faster.
I'm
to a
not
waypoint.
entirely sure how we got those numbers and what kind
Yeah,
of
no, like I
network
suggest
traffic we.
I suggest you go and measure, but that is the numbers that I've seen indicate that.
Again, numbers that, I mean, we have customers who are complaining about, traffic, those cross-zonal traffic, which can happen apparently. I mean, I at least with that I've seen, we do not keep it to the same zone when we talk with waypoints. And it's if the request it's going from a client and a server that are on the same machine, and the waypoint is on a different machine, both throughput and the latency are definitely not competitive.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the main
there's
use
certain-
case when you collocate.
like the
With
top
large
logic.
servers, yes, that's
Yes,
top of
but
the rack.
yes. Like, I agree there are topological situations. In the median case, right? Like same zone.
Oh,
not
median is not a problem. Yeah, no concern. I mean, the main problem is cross-zonal traffic, which are money basically. I mean, it's
Yeah, no, like
money.
that part's well understood, and I think is in the burn down list.
And the collocated case, which is actually very important because now with Kubernetes supporting services that are, local, I mean, they stay on the same node, you cannot beat, especially if you have, the 200 CPU nodes, you can collocate quite a bit and you can get in a situation where very little goes over the wire. And that's not very well handled without a per node L7, either as a sidecar
As a waypoint.
or as a waypoint, yeah, kind of a daemon set waypoint or something similar, but that's kind of a different.
Yeah, I mean, we were doing some looking at affinity and anti-affinity yesterday a little bit for waypoints. Mostly anti-affinity, actually, because waypoints do a good job with CPU utilization, and most applications or most codes don't. So if you put lots of waypoints on the same node, they tend to start competing for CPU. Whereas if you give them anti-affinity and stretch them out, they may actually do better for the median case, right? Which is separate from waypoint to workload affinity, where you say, like, maybe there's a good reason to co-locate a waypoint with, a workload that's going to receive a lot of traffic. And we'll have to look at both of those things, right, as part of the longer term optimization set that we do.
I think we are doing a lot of optimization for 2 CPU machine nodes or 4 CPU nodes or kind of demo nodes.
Well, these were N8 or N16s. They were reasonably representative of what you see in people's production clusters. Like,
yes,
typical cost profile. Yes, there are obviously a wide range. There are people running on 512 core machines.
And the people who run with 200 scores are the ones that are more sensitive. I mean, we are talking about
Sure,
high
yeah.
scale. That's the only case where sidecar it really matters. If you have 2 CPUs, who cares? I mean, you are a toy. But if you are running with 200 CPUs on a machine, affinity works actually. You can afford to allocate 50 CPUs to Envoys if you really want to.
John, I was wondering that performance research that you mentioned in terms of upgrade, is that something you're likely to publish?
Performance or
Great.
zero downtime upgrade stuff.
The zero downtime on zTunnel.
I mean, it's. I have open PRs test. Do you mean like a blog post type document or the Easter.io page and how it works or what?
Sorry, you have open PRs to add the test to be part of our test suite?
Yeah, just in the normal integration tests.
Okay. Do we, I don't know that we have a way to publish like results from those integ tests. Would we set a success threshold of 0 need for retries or something along those lines, or?
How the test is currently run is, so we have this utility in the test that's like send a bunch of requests and you can configure the success criteria. So we set the success criteria to 100% of successors succeed. So.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yep. So I don't
So
think
the
we need to
other-
like publish like some dashboard of like, here's our success percentage. Like it's just either passes or fails. If it starts to fail, then either, I don't know, what do you reconsider? It was reliable on my machine. I haven't run it multiple times in CI/CD to see, if it's still reliable there. So.
But a blog post, like talking about the operational impact of an upgrade
Oh yeah, I
for
think
both ztunnel and Waypoint makes a ton of sense.
yeah.
Yeah, I had
Because-
taken an action item.
Because we
to-
know what it is for Cycle, right? Like if we can like compare
Yeah.
metrics in that scenario.
I had taken an action item maybe 2 weeks ago to write a blog post to describe ztunnel, how we drain it, how you can drain the nodes, cordon them, upgrade the ztunnel with no traffic. It might be even like interesting to consolidate that into one blog post. Like, here's why you probably don't need to drain, and here's how to do it if you're particularly paranoid about traffic impacts.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Well, that's where the median connection lifetime discussion comes in, right? If that threshold, right, if it's 99.9% or under 1 hour, right, and we do, right, we have a grace period, right, that gets people to 99.99%. Do we ever need to talk about node tainting or any of that other madness, right? Or just say, look, just there's a section in the doc that says, look, that you can have this happen, but it's so rare, right? Like that we wouldn't even treat a report of it as a bug. This is just a known limitation.
Makes sense. Keith?
I was just going to add that I agree with you, Louis, when it comes to open source software. I think, I can't remember who it was earlier, but there are those customers, and most of us have seen them, who are so risk averse where even if the chance is rare, like they'll want to prepare for that use case because they're so sensitive to disruption. And so having some appendix or addendum somewhere, even if it's to a markdown file in the Istio repo, having a link to that in the blog post might be useful.
Yeah, I think that's fine. It's like, here's why the 99.99% of people are fine with just upgrading in place. And if you are in the 0.01%, here's how to do the node coordinating stuff. It's not fun, but you asked for it. Here you go, right?
Yeah, I just want to like be a little careful there and make sure that threshold is not so unreasonably high in the context of other things that can cause a similar failure mode. Right, like look at your typical cloud service, right? That many vendors here sell with 3 nines or 3.5 nines as an SLA, or the SLA of the underlying VPC on the cloud, right?
Yeah. We don't need to be better than the baseline.
Yeah. So like, let's just keep that in mind before we go and document something that's preventing an issue that can happen by another means anyway, and so is effectively irrelevant. I'm not saying that we shouldn't document it, right? If there's a gap between those two thresholds, but I just want to make sure that we understand there's an upper bound too. Like I can randomly pick on like cloud hosted database instance service, look at its SLA, right, for how long it's going to keep its IP stable, right, assuming it did an IP allocation. And then if it reallocated an IP, well, your connection would drop. And so like, what's the SLA for that? How much better than that do we need to be, et cetera? Or like what's the guarantee for the lifetime of a VM? Right? Or the average lifecycle churn of a VM? I know it varies based on how much you paid for the VM and things like that, right? But once you're into 4.9s territory, right, you're starting to look at those kinds of things. Hell, even 3.9s territory. 4.9s is what, 5 minutes a month, right, of stability, uptime guarantee.
And it seems like one Z tunnel upgrade, even if we have no drain whatsoever, if you just nuke the Z tunnel and replace it, you're not looking at 5 minutes.
No. You're not even close to that. Now, it's the T, right? Like, obviously, this is a much more complicated calculation than that, but right, we're in that ballpark. The chat is hilarious. Yeah, so maybe it's worthwhile doing a little research to find like what's the highest SLA, longest lived connection to a thing that somebody's likely to be using in production, and like look at its ergonomics and compare it against what we're going to do. Like the one thing we would know, like most of the database client libraries, even though they use fairly long-lived connections, tend to handle connection retries pretty well. Right? I mean, pretty stable bits of code for a very, very, very long time. It's the crappy ones or the handwritten TCP clients, right, where we're going to run into issues. Yeah, and as Ben says, internal stuff. That XMPP server you wrote 2 decades ago. But if people want to volunteer services as kind of canonical suggestions for things that need to be stable, certainly go look at them. Probably database and caching. Database instances would probably be the most important one, because when they go out, they have the most disruptive systemic effect on an organization, generally speaking. Like Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, like look at their ergonomics.
And don't we support Quick and HTTP3? And did you do any testing with it, or?
We don't currently capture UDP, so it's like
Are you
sidecars.
talking about Z-tunnel or Envoy Ingress custom?
vTunnel mostly, yeah. I think
Yeah, we don't have any
went out
capture. So
Okay.
sorry. I guess there's 2 parts: the app doing HTTP3 and ztunnel doing HTTP3. But neither of those is implemented in any way. So for the app
Okay,
doing it,
anyway.
it's UDP. We don't capture it. ztunnel, someone might have an experimental branch somewhere in some repo, but there's never even been a PR or anything. So
No, it's curious how it interacts with subreddit. Because
yeah, I mean,
that's kind of
we'll want to capture UDP and support that eventually. Obviously, it's just no
eventually,
event,
yes, I know.
Whenever we do want to kick that off, I'm sure we can ping Nate. I know he had something that was at least
Yeah,
somewhat
exactly.
working, and I'm sure he'd be willing to hand that off to one of us. He just doesn't have time to drive it himself, as far as I know.
I'll go buy him a beer. See if I can get him to hand the code over. Yeah, I don't think we're still seeing a lot of quick inside the data center. Right, most quick to the edge is still H2 or H1 internal. For performance reason. Like UDP in the data center does not outperform TCP today.
Yeah.
And that's mostly
I mean,
because
there's still reasons we'll want to support UDP outside.
yeah, no, like we'll still want to do it, but I haven't heard that as burning feedback for sidecars or Istio for a long time. Like when was the last time somebody said, please secure my UDP, except for DNS? Like leaving that one aside. which we actually already do stuff for. So,
No, modern UDP is secure already. I mean, WebRTC and pretty much all the UDP-based protocols are now already incorporate TLS.
yeah, so I haven't heard a user request it in quite a while.
Yeah, I agree.
That was a fun retrospective. Anybody else have anything they want to share? Observations? Okie doke, I guess we can wrap up.